That dress isn't even worth $20. The mocking laughter cut through the air, silencing the diner. The lawyer sneered, "Born to wipe tables, don't ever dream of sitting at one." The powerful billionaire only smirked his eyes, treating her like dust. But then her gaze fell on his hand, a gold ring engraved with 2 interlocked letters, exactly like the one her mother clutched in an old photo while pregnant. Her chest tightened, lips trembling as her voice sliced the air. "Dad." He froze, his face drained of all color. The diner fell into dead silence, because he knew the secret he had buried for 30 years had just been ripped into the light, and the one staring back at him was the very daughter he had denied. Aria Collins stood there, her hands still gripping the coffee pot, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The diner smelled of grease and burnt toast, the kind of place where truckers and locals gathered over chipped mugs and overcooked eggs. She wore a faded blue dress, no makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. To the people in the room, she looked like nobody, just a waitress. But that single word, Dad, had shifted something. The air felt heavier now, like the whole place was holding its breath. She didn't back down, didn't look away. Her eyes locked on Dominic Vance, the billionaire whose name was on half the buildings in the city. And she waited. Dominic's face twitched, a flicker of something, fear maybe, before he smoothed it over. He leaned back in his booth, his tailored suit catching the dim light. Celine, his daughter, sat beside him, her manicured nails tapping the table, her designer dress screaming money. She laughed sharp and loud, breaking the silence. "Oh, this is rich. A waitress calling my father Dad. You must be desperate." Her voice dripped with venom, her green eyes narrowing as she scanned Aria's plain clothes. Victor Hale, the lawyer, chuckled from the other side of the table, his slicked back hair and gold watch gleaming with self-importance. "Careful, girl," he said, leaning forward. "You don't want to embarrass yourself more than you already have." A trucker at the counter, his flannel shirt stained with coffee, joined in with a smirk. "Girl, you think you're some long-lost heiress. This ain't a movie." His buddy next to him snorted, shaking his head. Aria's fingers tightened on the coffee pot, the ceramic warm against her palm. She set it down slowly, her movements deliberate, like she was measuring each second. Her eyes flicked to the trucker, then back to Dominic. She didn't speak, but the way she tilted her head just slightly made the trucker's smirk falter. He looked down at his plate, suddenly interested in his eggs. Celine noticed and snapped, "What, you think a look's gonna change anything? You're still nobody." Aria's lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned to refill another customer's cup, her silence louder than any comeback. The diner wasn't done with her. A woman in a loud floral blouse, her lipstick smudged from sipping coffee, leaned over to her friend and said, "Can you believe she's still standing there? Like she thinks she belongs with people like the Vances." Her friend, a middle-aged guy with a cheap tie, laughed. "Bet she's just fishing for tips." Pathetic. Aria was wiping down a table nearby, her rag moving in slow, steady circles. She paused just for a second, her hand hovering over a sticky spot. The woman noticed and raised her voice. "Hey, honey, don't get any ideas. You're not fooling anyone." Aria straightened, folded the rag neatly, and walked to the next table. But as she passed, she looked the woman dead in the eye. Not angry, not pleading, just steady. The woman's laugh died in her throat, and she busied herself with her purse. In the kitchen, Aria leaned against the counter, the clatter of dishes and the hum of the fryer filling the air. She pulled a small photo from her pocket, creased and worn, of her mother. Young, laughing, standing next to a man with that same ring on his hand. Aria's fingers traced the edge of the photo, her breath catching. She'd carried it for years, ever since she was a kid in foster care, bouncing from house to house after her mom died. Nobody had ever told her who her father was. But that ring, it was unmistakable. She slipped the photo back into her pocket, squared her shoulders, and went back to work. The diner wasn't done with her yet. Later that shift, a new face walked, in a young guy in a flashy jacket, probably a junior exec trying to impress. He spotted Aria and grinned too wide, too confident. "Hey, I heard you're claiming to be a Vance. That true?" His voice carried drawing eyes from every corner of the diner. Aria was carrying a tray of plates, her arms steady despite the weight. She set them down one by one before turning to him. "You heard wrong," she said, her voice low, even. The guy laughed, leaning back in his seat. "Oh, come on. Don't be shy. Tell us your big story." The room chuckled, the air growing tight again. Aria didn't blink. She picked up an empty glass from his table and said, "You done with this?" The question was simple, but the way she held his gaze made him shift in his seat, his grin fading. The next day, the Vance family was back. This time, it was a private dinner at their sprawling estate, the kind of place with marble floors and chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. Aria was there not as a guest, but as a server hired through the diner for extra cash. She moved through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne, her plain black dress blending into the background. The guests were all high society men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns, their laughter loud and their voices sharper. Celine stood at the center, her red dress hugging her frame, her smile practiced and perfect. She spotted Aria and smirked, nudging a woman next to her. "Look at her," Celine said loud enough for the room to hear. "She's the one who called my father Dad yesterday. Can you believe it?" The woman, her face caked with makeup and her neck dripping with pearls, laughed. "What, the waitress? Oh, that's pathetic. She thinks she's one of you." The crowd around them chuckled their eyes, cutting toward Aria as she set down a tray. Victor, standing nearby with a glass of whiskey, joined in. "If she's a Vance, I'm the president." Her mother was probably some fling who got lucky once. The words landed like punches, each one heavier than the last. Aria's hand paused on a glass, her fingers tightening for a moment before she let go. She didn't look up, didn't speak, just kept moving. Her steps measured her face, calm. But then a man in a velvet blazer, his cufflinks flashing under the chandelier, decided to pile on. He leaned towards Celine, his voice dripping with fake pity. Poor thing. She probably thinks serving champagne makes her part of the family. The laughter spread sharp and cruel like glass shattering. Aria was refilling a tray at the bar when she heard it. She stopped, her hands still for just a moment, then picked up a bottle and poured slow and precise. Celine noticed and sauntered over her heels, clicking. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said, her voice low but cutting. "Go back to your little diner." Aria set the bottle down, looked Celine in the eye and said, "You're loud tonight." The words were soft, but they hit hard. Celine's smile twitched and she turned away. Her cheeks flushed. In the quiet of the kitchen later, Aria stood by the sink, scrubbing a tray, the water splashing against her hands. The head chef, a gruff guy with a scarred hand, noticed her silence. "You okay, kid?" he asked, tossing a towel over his shoulder. Aria didn't look up, just kept scrubbing, her movement steady but fierce. The tray was already clean, but she didn't stop. The chef watched her for a moment, then turned back to his stove. Aria's hands slowed, and she stared at the water, her reflection distorted in the bubbles. She saw her mother's face again, not in a photo this time, but in the way her own jaw set, the way her eyes didn't waver. She dried her hands and went back to the party, her steps firm. The dinner was winding down when a woman in a silver gown, her hair swept up in an elaborate bun, approached Aria. She was older, her face lined but sharp like she'd seen the world and didn't trust it. "You're the one they're talking about," she said, her voice low, curious. Aria was clearing glasses, her hands steady. She didn't respond, just kept working. The woman tilted her head, studying her. "You've got her eyes," she said almost to herself. "Your mother's—" Aria's hand froze midair, a glass half lifted. She set it down carefully, her face blank, but her fingers brushed the pocket where she kept the photo. The woman didn't say more, just walked away, leaving Aria standing there, the weight of those words sinking in. The next week, the stakes got higher. Aria was at a financial conference serving coffee to a room full of suits and egos. The Vance family was there, of course, Dominic at the head of the table, Selena preening for the cameras, Victor schmoozing with investors. Aria moved quietly, pouring coffee, her plain black skirt and white blouse making her invisible to most of the room. But Celine saw her. "Oh, look," she said, her voice carrying across the conference room. "It's the girl who thinks she's a Vance. What's next, claiming you own this company?" The room erupted in laughter, heads turning to stare at Aria. A man in a flashy tie chimed in. "She's probably here to beg for a job. Stick to coffee, honey." During a break, a young assistant barely out of college, his tie slightly crooked, decided to join the fun. He sidled up to Aria as she refilled a coffee urn, his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "So, you're the one with the big story. What's it like thinking you're a billionaire's kid?" He grinned, expecting a reaction. Aria kept pouring, her movement smooth, but her eyes flicked to his name tag, Jason, some junior analyst. "You're new here, aren't you?" she said, her voice calm, almost gentle. Jason laughed, thrown off. "Yeah, so what?" Aria set the urn down and looked at him, her gaze steady. "You'll learn," she said, and walked away. Jason's grin faded as a few people nearby exchanged glances, sensing something in her tone they couldn't place. That night, Arya sat on her couch, the letter from her mother in her hands. She read it again, her fingers brushing over the faded ink. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He promised we'd be a family. She set the letter down and pulled out the photo again, the one with the ring. Her mother's smile was so bright in it, so full of hope. Arya's chest ached, a sharp, sudden pain that made her close her eyes. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and tired, telling her to be strong no matter what. Arya folded the letter and tucked it away. She wasn't done yet. The conference was packed the next morning and the air thick with tension as deals were made and egos clashed. Arya was there, still serving, still in her plain clothes. But something was different. She carried a small envelope in her pocket, and her eyes were sharper, more focused. Selene didn't let up. Back again? She called out, her voice dripping with scorn. You're persistent, I'll give you that. But you're still nobody. The crowd chuckled, but it was quieter this time, less certain. Arya didn't respond. She just kept working her movements, calm, her face unreadable. But when she passed Dominic's table, she set down a cup and let the envelope slip onto the table, just for a moment, long enough for him to see it. Dominic's eyes flicked to the envelope, then to Arya. His hand froze midair, his coffee untouched. The envelope had her mother's name on it, written in his own handwriting. He didn't say a word, but his face changed paler, tighter, like he'd seen a ghost. Arya didn't linger. She picked up the envelope and walked away, leaving him staring after her. The room didn't notice, but Victor did. He leaned over to Dominic, whispering something, his eyes darting to Arya. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The seed was planted. In the hallway later, a security guard, his badge shiny and his posture stiff, stopped Arya as she carried a tray of empty cups. You're causing a stir, he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. People are talking. You sure you want to keep this up? Arya set the tray down on a nearby table, her hands steady. She looked at the guard, her eyes clear. I'm just doing my job, she said, her voice even. The guard studied her for a moment, then nodded, stepping aside. As she walked away, she heard him mutter, You've got guts, kid. Arya's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She kept moving the tray balanced in her hands. The conference was buzzing by the afternoon, the air thick with deals and egos. Arya was clearing plates when Selene stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. I want to address something, she said, her smile tight. There's a rumor going around about some waitress claiming to be my sister. Let's be clear, she's nothing. A nobody with a sad little story. The room laughed, but it was uneasy now. Arya set down a plate of her hands steady and turned to face Selena. She didn't say anything, just reached into her pocket and pulled out the photo, the one with her mother and Dominic, the ring clear as day. She set it on the table right in front of Selene. The room went quiet. Selene's smile faltered as she looked at the photo. Dominic's chair scraped as he stood up, his voice sharp. That's fake, he said, but his hands were shaking. The crowd murmured, heads craning to see. A woman in a blue dress whispered, That's his ring. I've seen it before. Arya didn't say a word. She just looked at Dominic, her eyes steady, unblinking. Victor tried to laugh it off. Nice try, he said, but his voice was too loud, too forced. Arya picked up the photo and walked away, leaving the room buzzing with whispers. During a quiet moment, Arya was restocking napkins when an older man, his suit wrinkled and his glasses slightly crooked, approached her. He was a minor investor, someone who'd been in the room but stayed out of the spotlight. I knew your mother, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Arya's hands paused, a stack of napkins still in her grip. She didn't look at him, just kept stacking, but her shoulders tensed. She was kind, he said, and she deserved better. He hesitated, then added, You look just like her when you stand up to them. Arya's fingers tightened on the napkins, but she didn't respond. The man walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of his words. Later that evening, Arya was in the back room stacking cups when Ethan Cross walked in. He was tall, quiet, with kind eyes and a flannel shirt that looked out of place among the suits. He'd been her friend since they were kids, back when they'd shared sandwiches in foster homes and promised to stick together. He didn't say much, just handed her a water bottle and sat down. You okay? He asked, his voice low. Arya nodded, but her hands paused, gripping the bottle a little too tight. They're not going to stop, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan looked at her, his jaw tight. They don't know who they're messing with, he said, and something in his tone made her look up. The next day, the conference reached its peak. Arya was there, still serving, still quiet. But the whispers were louder now. People were watching her, not just mocking her. A man in a gray suit hesitated before taking his coffee, his eyes lingering on her face. "You look like someone I knew," he said almost to himself. Arya didn't respond, just handed him the cup and moved on. But the air was different now, charged with something unspoken. Celine noticed it too. She stood up again, her voice sharper this time. "This needs to stop," she said. "She's not a Vance. She's just a waitress with a fantasy." That's when Arya stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene. She just held up a piece of paper, a DNA test result. "I sent this in last week," she said, her voice clear, steady. "The results came back today." She handed the paper to a man at the front, a neutral party, who opened it, and read aloud 99. 9% match. Arya Collins is the biological daughter of Dominic Vance. The room exploded in gasps, murmurs, shouts. Celine's face went white, her hands gripping the table. Dominic stood frozen, his eyes locked on the paper. Victor tried to speak, but his words stumbled, lost in the chaos. Right after the announcement, a woman in a sharp blazer, her hair pulled back tight, pushed through the crowd. She was a journalist, her badge clipped to her pocket, her eyes gleaming with ambition. "Is this true?" she asked Arya, holding up a recorder. "Are you really his daughter?" The room turned to watch the air crackling with anticipation. Arya didn't flinch. She folded her hands in front of her posture straight, and said, "The paper speaks for itself." The journalist pressed closer, her voice eager. "And what about you? What's your next move?" Arya's eyes flicked to Dominic, then back to the journalist. "I'm just getting started," she said, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the noise. The crowd murmured, phones already out, recording every word. Celine recovered first, her voice shaking, but loud. "So, what? Blood doesn't mean anything. She's still nothing." The crowd was quieter now, unsure. Victor jumped in, his tone sharp. "No legal documents, no recognition. She's just a mistake." Dominic finally spoke, his voice low, dangerous. "You'll never be part of this family." Arya didn't flinch. She just looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, "We'll see." The words were soft, but they landed like a hammer. The room was hers now, whether they liked it or not. The next morning, the conference hall was electric with gossip. Arya was setting up a coffee station when a young woman, her designer purse slung over her shoulder, approached. She was one of Celine's friends, her smile sharp and fake. "You're causing quite a scene," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But let's be real, you'll never fit in. You don't even know how to hold a wine glass properly." The people nearby chuckled, their eyes on Arya. She didn't look up, just kept arranging cups, her hands steady. But then she paused, picked up a cup, and handed it to the woman. "Careful," she said, her voice even. "It's hot." The woman took it, her smile slipping as Arya's gaze held hers, unyielding. The room felt smaller, the air tighter. The next blow came fast. Arya pulled out another document, this one older, heavier. A will written by Dominic's father, the founder of the Vance Empire. She handed it to the same man, who read it aloud. "All children, legitimate or not, shall have equal claim to the company's shares." The room gasped again, louder this time. Celine screamed, "No, that's not real." But the document was notarized, stamped undeniable. Dominic's face was ashen, his hands clenched into fists. The stock market was already reacting. Vance shares were plummeting as news of the dispute spread. Arya stood there calm, her hands folded in front of her. In the chaos, a man in a navy suit, his face lined with years of boardroom battles, approached Arya. He was a board member, someone who'd known Dominic for decades. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, his voice low, almost a warning. Arya was clearing a table, her movements precise. She set down a plate and looked at him, her eyes clear. "I'm not playing," she said, her voice steady. The man studied her, then nodded almost imperceptibly before walking away. Arya watched him go, her hands still for a moment, then went back to work, the weight of his words lingering. The final humiliation came that night. Celine, desperate, cornered Arya in the hallway. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You're still alone. Nobody loves you. You'll die alone." Victor joined in, his voice cold. "Money doesn't buy respect. You're nothing to these people." Dominic stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "You're a stain on my name," he said. "You'll always be a mistake." The words echoed sharp and cruel, meant to break her. Arya didn't move. She just looked at them, her face calm, her eyes bright. And then she heard footsteps. Ethan Cross walked into the hallway, his presence quiet but commanding. He didn't look at Celine or Victor or Dominic. He looked at Arya, and he took her hand. "They say nobody loves you," he said, his voice steady, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "But I'm here." He paused, then turned to the room. "I'm Ethan Cross, CEO of Aurora Tech, and we just signed a billion-dollar deal with Vance Industries. But as of now, that contract belongs to Aria Collins." The room erupted, gasps and shouts filling the air. Celine screamed, her hands shaking. Dominic staggered, his face gray. Victor's mouth opened, but no words came out. As the crowd buzzed, a young man in a cheap suit, his face pale with nerves, slipped through the chaos. He was an intern barely noticed by anyone, but he'd been watching Aria all day. He handed her a folded note, his hands trembling. "Someone asked me to give this to you," he said, then disappeared into the crowd. Aria opened it, her fingers steady. It was a single line written in neat, careful script. "Your mother would be proud." No signature, no name. Aria's breath caught just for a moment, and she tucked the note into her pocket, her face still calm, but her eyes brighter. She turned to Ethan, nodding slightly, and they kept walking. Aria didn't say a word. She just squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes bright with something new, relief maybe, or hope. The crowd was on its feet, some clapping, some whispering, some staring in disbelief. Celine's screams faded into sobs as she sank into a chair. Dominic turned away, his shoulders slumped, his empire crumbling. Victor slipped out of the room, his face pale, his phone already buzzing with bad news. Aria and Ethan walked out together, her step steady, his hand warm in hers. The crowd parted for them, the air electric with what they'd just witnessed. The consequences came fast. Celine's reputation tanked. Her social media was flooded with screenshots of her cruel words. Her sponsorships dropped overnight. Victor was fired from the Vance legal team, his name blacklisted in every major firm. Dominic's company lost millions as investors pulled out his name, no longer untouchable. Aria didn't look back. She didn't need to. The truth had done its work. She walked forward, her plain dress and quiet grace, now a symbol of something bigger: strength, resilience, truth. The next morning, Aria was at a small cafe, not serving this time, but sitting at a corner table, a stack of papers in front of her. A lawyer, not Victor, but a new one with kind eyes and a worn briefcase, sat across from her. He slid a document across the table, his voice quiet. "This makes it official. You're a shareholder now." Aria's fingers brushed the paper, her eyes scanning the words. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just nodded, her hand steady as she signed. The lawyer watched her, then said, "You're not what they expected." Aria looked up, her gaze clear. "Good," she said, and closed the folder. In the days that followed, Aria stood taller, her eyes brighter. She didn't flaunt her new power, didn't boast about her shares or her place in the Vance family. She just kept moving, signing papers, making calls, building something new. Ethan was there, steady as always, his quiet presence a reminder that she wasn't alone. The world had changed for her, but she hadn't. She was still Aria, still the girl who'd carried that photo, who'd held on to her mother's promise, who'd faced a room full of cruelty and walked away whole. The story doesn't end with fireworks or a crown. It ends with a quiet moment, Aria standing by a window, looking out at the city, her hand resting on that old photo. Ethan stood beside her, not saying much, just there. The world had judged her, mocked her, tried to break her. But she had stood her ground, not with screams or tears, but with truth. And in that truth she'd found her place, not just as a Vance, but as herself. You felt that, haven't you? That moment when the world tries to tell you you're nothing but you know better. You're not wrong. You're not alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.